In August 2026, Game Freak can still freeze a weekend with a brand new role-playing world, and the internet treats that heat as proof Japanese game studios never lost their nerve. 25 years earlier, the studio that taught the planet to care about those worlds walked into a different business and almost did not walk out. July 2001. First Honolulu, then Los Angeles. A digital woman named Aki Ross blinks on a cinema screen, with pores, flyaway hair, and a pulse that does not exist. Square, the company behind Final Fantasy, has spent years and a war chest built on PlayStation discs to prove a game studio can manufacture a movie star from polygons and light. The production bill settles near $137 million. For a first feature, that figure is not a line item. It is a claim on the firm. The paradox is almost elegant. Square is not dying when it makes this bet. It is flush. A PlayStation mega hit has already turned a Japanese series into a global language. The hardware partner is selling consoles. The software house in Shinjuku is selling sequels.
And the man who named the franchise after a last chance has decided the next last chance is a film industry that does not love outsiders. He is not trying to photograph a game. That is the part the one sheet will hide. There are no crystals in the marketing, no airships a teenager can point to in a mall. The story is set on a ruined Earth, sold as adult science fiction that happens to share a famous title. Players will look for a franchise and find a stranger. Moviegoers will look for a movie and find a video game logo stamped on the poster like a warning. If the experiment works, Square owns a library of digital flesh it can rent across the Pacific. If it fails, the cash meant to fund the next decade of games disappears, and the independence that lets Square argue with publishers disappears with it. On opening night, the lights go down on a company that still believes it can purchase a new industry, the way it once purchased faster machines. By the time the credits finish, the question is no longer whether computer images can look like people. It is whether a game company can survive being wrong about who those images were for.
Most people remember the late 90s as the moment Japanese role-playing games left the bedroom and entered the living room. They remember a spiky-haired mercenary on a silver disc. They do not remember the balance sheet that disc created, or the permission that money gave a private Japanese software house to stop thinking like a licensee. In 1997, Final Fantasy VII does more than sell. It rewires Square's sense of scale. The company has already survived a near collapse in the mid-1980s and named a series after that scare. Now the scare is over. Compact discs replace cartridges. Pre-rendered backdrops replace the last excuses about hardware. Western teenagers who never touched a Super Nintendo learn a Tokyo developer's name. Cash arrives in a form mid-sized Japanese publishers almost never see. Global software profit, tied to a hardware partner that needs prestige as badly as Square needs shelf space. That partner is Sony Computer Entertainment. The relationship is still a commercial marriage. Square can walk. That walking room is the asset nobody prints on a jewel case. Flush years invite a specific daydream.
If a game can already look like a movie, why rent Hollywood? Why not own the faces? In 1997, the same year the seventh Final Fantasy lands, Square plants a second flag in Honolulu and incorporates Square Pictures. Hawaii is not a postcard whim. The island sits between Tokyo and Los Angeles. It can hire American technical directors without asking them to abandon the Pacific. It can run a motion capture volume far from a game team's crunch calendar. It can pretend, for a few fiscal years, that a video game publisher is also a studio in the old California sense. The blind spot is not ambition, it is category. Toy Story has already taught families that computers can be charming. Titanic and The Phantom Menace are teaching adults that computers can swallow a budget. None of those productions asked a mid-sized Japanese publisher to carry first-dollar risk on photoreal humans who must hold a close-up for 2 hours. Pixar sold toys. Lucas sold a religion. Square is preparing to sell a solemn original science fiction film under a role-playing trademark, paid for largely with software profits, inside an island factory whose only inventory is frames. A lavish game is still a controlled burn.
You press a disc. You know the stock-keeping unit.
You can recoup in Osaka before London wakes. A photoreal feature is another machine. Every lock of hair is electricity. Every rewrite is a month of artists who do not ship expansion packs. Theater chains take a cut, the distributor takes a cut. Financiers talk, quietly, about needing something near twice production cost before anyone feels whole. Square's managers can forecast a Japanese sell-through to the unit. They are about to learn that Hollywood break-even is a story told by people who already own the screens. By late 2000, the Honolulu building is no longer a skunkworks. It is a second firm living on the first firm's oxygen. Hundreds of specialists rotate through a payroll that does not pause when a game team would have already gold-mastered. Custom tools push skin and cloth past anything a living room console can display. The parent in Japan is finishing a new numbered Final Fantasy for Sony's next machine. 2 clocks run in one house. One clock is a magazine ship date. The other is a premiere that will judge not a battle menu, but a face. This was not merchandising. Square did not greenlight a souvenir.
It tried to change the company's species. Games would remain the engine. Film would become proof that Square owned the future of the human image, a catalog it could license the way it once licensed a mascot to a snack company. That is why the wreckage later cannot be read as one weak weekend. It is a capital decision made at the exact moment a hit felt like a mandate. The premiere's contradiction is already in the ledgers. A solvent, proud, independent publisher has built a second identity that only strangers with tickets can justify. Nobody has asked those strangers whether they wanted the trademark without the world attached to it.
The man carrying the wager is Hironobu Sakaguchi. He is not a studio tourist. He is the designer who turned a threatened company into a franchise, then spent a decade pushing that franchise towards cinema inside a television. The Honolulu project is that instinct with the governor removed. He does not pitch a cartoon. He pitches a species. Square Pictures will not merely finish one feature. It will birth a performer who never ages, never renegotiates, never dies in a car wreck on Sunset. The working name on the heroine is Aki Ross. She is a scientist in a ruined future, and she is also a file. If the file works, Square owns a leading lady, the way a record company once owned a master tape. That is the hidden motive under the art talk, not a poster, an asset. To make the board believe, Sakaguchi needs Hollywood veterans in the building, not only Japanese programmers who have shipped battle menus. Square hires Chris Lee, a former production president from Columbia Pictures, to translate between Shinjuku Capital and Los Angeles Craft. Screenwriters Al Reinert and Jeff Vintar are brought in to write English science fiction, not a translation of a game script.
Voices are bought at movie prices. Ming-Na Wen will speak for Aki. Alec Baldwin, James Woods, Donald Sutherland, Ving Rhames, and Steve Buscemi will stand behind the pixels. This is not a Saturday morning tie-in. This is a real picture with real throats. Then come the life or death choices, the ones that cannot be patched after launch. The first is the world. Sakaguchi could film a story players already paid to inhabit. He refuses. He wants critics who do not own consoles. He wants the Berlin Wall between games and cinema torn down by seriousness, not by a Chocobo cameo. The script stays on Earth. The monsters become alien bioforms with a scientific alibi. The famous title remains as a bridge and a bet. The second is the face. Photorealism is the hill. Stylization would have been cheaper and closer to the games that funded the hill. Photorealism is the point. If Aki's skin fails in a 40-foot close-up, the virtual actor business dies in public. So the team chases pores, they chase cloth, they chase the wet edge of an eye. Time becomes a furnace. The third is the customer. Square's marketers try to float Aki as a celebrity independent of plot. She appears in magazines as if she could arrive at a premiere in a car. For a moment, the industry plays along, fascinated by the stunt. Fascination is not a demographic. The people who love Final Fantasy want the grammar they bought on disc. The people who love adult science fiction have Ridley Scott and do not need a publisher's logo to find him. Sakaguchi's incentive is not a quarterly bonus. It is authorship in a city that still treats game directors as children with expensive toys.
The board's incentive is diversification, a second profit engine before the next hardware cycle squeezes margins. Both incentives point at the same green light. Neither incentive asks what happens if the only people who would forgive a cold story are the people the story was written to leave behind. He gets the movie. He will also get the invoice.
July 2001 arrives like a double exposure. In American malls, Columbia Pictures opens Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within on the 11th. 8 days later in Japan, Square ships Final Fantasy X, a proper numbered game for the PlayStation 2, the product the company still knows how to make. One roof, two verdicts. Only one of them will be allowed to miss. The film's first weekend is not a catastrophe in the theatrical sense. It is something colder. Curious adults buy tickets to see if a woman made of light can act. Children who wanted a branded adventure fidget. Critics, in paper after paper, perform the same split. The images are a new kind of expensive. The story is a used kind of thin. The uncanny valley, a phrase still finding its popular legs, becomes the reviewer's friend. Aki's hair moves. Her eyes do not quite negotiate. Audiences leave talking about the surface, which is another way of saying they were never inside. Domestic receipts stall in the low 30 millions. Overseas markets add their share. The global take settles near $85 million.
Against a production outlay that had already shocked the trades, and against prints and advertising that Hollywood layers on after the last pixel is approved, $85 million is not a soft landing. It is a hole. Summer 2001 is already crowded with live faces audiences trust. A computer-generated adult drama has to be a destination. Trailers lean on explosions and a whispered mythology that never quite explains why a person who does not play games should care. Exhibitors give it screens, then give those screens back. The second weekend falls the way second weekends fall when word of mouth is a shrug. And then, everything breaks. In Tokyo, accountants stop speaking the language of experiment. They speak the language of a special loss. Square books a charge of 13.9 billion yen, about $115 million, against the picture and the factory that made it. Operating profit for the period does not merely shrink, it is erased. A company that had used game cash as if it were inexhaustible discovers in a single line on a filing that a film can consume a year. Shareholders do the arithmetic the board postponed. The stock sags. Lenders look again at covenants. Inside the company, producers who had been promised a new medium are told to find the exits from an island payroll. Square Pictures will limp through one more assignment, a short for the Animatrix project called Final Flight of the Osiris, a calling card that arrives after the house is already on fire. Then the Honolulu experiment is wound down. The virtual actress, built to outlive every contract player in town, is retired by a balance sheet. Enix, the publisher of Dragon Quest and Square's only peer in the Japanese role-playing duopoly, has been circling a merger. Combining the two catalogs would create a fortress. Combining them now would mean Enix shareholders inherit a crater. Talks halt. The fortress is postponed. Independence, which had been a negotiating position, becomes a liquidity problem. Sakaguchi does what founders do when a personal film becomes a corporate event. He steps away from the executive floor. The resignation is not a rumor tabloid flourish. It is the visible price of a green light that could not be explained as a rounding error. The man who named a series after survival has to survive outside the officer list of the company he defined. October 2001. Sony does not arrive as a fan. It arrives as a treasury. Square sells an 18.6% stake to its hardware partner to keep cash on the accounts and confidence in the banks. The deal is described, in the careful English of press statements, as a strengthening of an alliance. In the plainer English of corporate control, it is an emergency sale of the walking room. The partner that once needed Square's games now owns a block of Square's future votes. The commercial marriage gains a share register. This is the truth the later mythology likes to smash into a simpler tombstone. Square does not vanish. The game teams do not padlock the Shinjuku doors. Final Fantasy X, shipping in the same brutal month as the film, does what the film could not. Japanese players line up for a world that still speaks their grammar.
A pilgrimage, a blitzball stadium, a character named Titus, who was allowed to be loud and uncool and branded. The PlayStation 2 installment becomes a commercial pillar, then a catalog that keeps throwing off cash.
The company lives because it still knows how to make a disc for the people who were ignored by the one sheet. Living is not the same as remaining sole master of the house. Yoichi Wada, taking the presidency through the wreckage, inherits a publisher that must negotiate its recovery with a minority owner who also manufactures the console. Enix will return to the table later, and in April 2003, the two catalogs will finally combine as Square Enix. That ending is real. So is the scar underneath it. The standalone Square that could tell Sony no. The Square that could fund a Honolulu moonshot from its own pocket without asking a hardware company for air does not survive the special loss intact. Dominoes keep falling in quieter rooms. Artists who crossed an ocean for a new medium scatter into effects houses and game teams. The promise that a Japanese publisher would set the terms of digital flesh moves to other campuses, other decades, other balance sheets large enough to lose a feature and continue. Columbia distributes and moves on. Distributors have slates. The inventor has one name on the marquee. July's double exposure remains the wound.
In one market, a game with the same surname prints money by being exactly what its audience rehearsed. In the other, a film with that surname teaches a proud company the oldest Hollywood lesson, the one game producers are protected from by patches and sequels. You can be early and still be finished. You can ship beauty and still be insolvent. You can survive and still have sold the part of yourself that made the risk possible. The later industry will make digital faces ordinary. Video game movies will eventually print money for other catalogs, other decades, when the audience has already been trained by a dozen failures. That future does not refund the firm that paid tuition in Honolulu. What Square misunderstood was not pixels. It was transfer. A customer who will spend 60 hours in your world is not automatically a customer who will spend 2 hours in your seriousness. Brand is not a pipe. Brand is a set of promises, and Square spent the premiere breaking the ones that had filled its accounts. Hollywood, for its part, does not grade on visionary effort. It grades on the cruel ratio between what a film cost to exist and what strangers paid to sit down. Miss that ratio far enough, and you are not an artist. You are a special loss. Hubris in this story is not a mustache. It is a spreadsheet that treats last year's hit as a mandate to switch industries. It is a board that funds a second company because the first company is tired of being called a toy. It is a founder who believes the thing he invented is a stepping stone rather than the business. Those are human motives.
They are also how independence is sold without anyone calling the meeting a surrender. Walk through the aftertaste in objects. A render farm that goes dark. A share certificate with a new column. A merger that happens later, after the proud name has already been diluted, and produces a larger catalog company that still ships numbered fantasies to the people who never wanted the film. Sakaguchi will build another studio, Mistwalker, and make games again, which is its own verdict on where the work actually lived. Sony will keep making consoles. The island will keep making weather. The principle that belongs here is smaller than a sermon about technology and larger than a box office recap. When a company finally has enough cash to buy a new self, the danger is not poverty. The danger is that money erases the last argument against a beautiful, unforced error. Constraints are ugly. Constraints also tell you who pays you. Game companies are especially exposed to this fever because their hits already look like cinema. The resemblance is a trap. A cutscene is a promise you control. A theatrical market is a room you rent, filled with people who owe you nothing and who can walk out at minute 12. Square learned the difference in public, then spent years quietly making the old promises again. Square's film did not kill Square. The rescue and the next hit prevented that simpler ending. What the film killed was the version of the company that could lose a fortune without asking its hardware partner for a chair. That death does not show up in a box office chart. It shows up whenever a later executive, staring at a pile of software profit, wonders whether this is the year to become something else. On a Tokyo desk,
After the filings are signed, the paper looks ordinary. Names, percentages, a stamp. No explosion, no alien ghost. Just a line that says the walking room has a new owner. If a hit finally gives you the cash to abandon the people who made you solvent, how do you tell a destiny from a very expensive way to leave yourself?